Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden says he's hoping the White House Easter egg roll tradition will return next year. There was an empty celebration at the White House Monday. Mr. Biden quoted scripture saying the nation's, quote, longed-for dawn is almost here. After spending the weekend at Camp David, the president was met with questions from reporters on Republican opposition to raising corporate taxes to fund his infrastructure plan.
Are you afraid that a higher tax will drive corporations to other countries, though?
Not at all. Look, the tax, because there's no evidence of that. The tax was 36%. It's now down to 21%. And the idea that's bizarre. We were talking about a 28% tax that everybody thought was just fair enough for everybody. The idea is here you have 51 or 52 corporations of the Fortune 500 haven't paid a single penny in tax for 3 years? Come on, man.
The more than $2 trillion bill isn't just getting pushback from Republicans. Here's what West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin said about the plan.
As the bill exists today, it needs to be changed, Hoppy. The bottom line is that's what legislation is all about. This bill will not be in the same form you've seen it introduced or see people talking about it. The bill's coming to us basically as one large. It might be broken up into 3 different bills. We're going to look at it. Infrastructure is definitely needed in America, and we have to pay for it. We can't continue to throw caution to the wind. I think corporate should have been at 25%. But other than that, basically looking at all the loopholes and money that's uncollected.
Would you support 28? Would you? But right now the proposal is 28. No. You would not support 28.
Senator Manchin says he thinks the Biden proposal of a 28% corporate tax rate is too high. But the White House is arguing it is still lower than the rate before President Trump's tax cuts.
First, I think it's important to remind people that the corporate tax rate we're proposing is lower than it was in 2017. In fact, it's lower than it was from World War II until 2017. So we are still proposing a rate that is lower than it has been for the vast majority of time since anyone in this room was alive, I think, or around that amount of time. So that's our proposal. Of course, what the president proposed, raising it to 28%, and combined with the other tax proposals, would pay for the totality of the package. That's why he felt it was a responsible proposal to make.
Ed O'Keefe, Jacqueline Alemany, and Russell Contreras join me now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Jackie is a national political reporter for The Washington Post and author of the Post's Power Up newsletter. And Russell is a justice and race reporter for Axios. Welcome to you all. Ed, let me start with you. What changes could we be looking at for the president's plans, and what potential roadblocks lie ahead?
Well, certainly the roadblock that was exposed today is that there are Democrats who have concerns with how this White House would pay for its massive infrastructure bills. Hearing Joe Manchin say that nothing but 25% corporate tax rate is acceptable to him, and then hearing a little while later another moderate Democrat, Mark Warner of Virginia, say that the rate is probably going to have to be brought back down a little closer to what it is right now, is a signal that this White House faces some negotiating with members of its own party. You heard Jen Psaki say today, look, we're open to discussing this with members of both parties about how they would pay for things. One thing that Senator Mark Warner said is that he is still interested in that concept of a global tax rate that the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen talked about today in a speech. But, this is an example of how things are likely going to have to change. As Senator Manchin said in that radio interview, as presented right now is not necessarily how it's going to be passed. And he's right. This is going to be a weeks, if not months-long negotiation among Democrats, possibly with Republicans, before the package gets passed by the House and eventually the Senate.
Well, Jackie, your newsletter this morning focuses on what Republicans say they're hearing about the Biden administration's approach to the bill. How is the White House defending their big government goals to Republicans who show little interest in getting on board?
Well, the White House has showed, especially in their Sunday show appearances over the weekend, that they're not backing down from trumpeting this package as a huge and historic New Deal-esque package. They're actually sort of replicating, I think, the PR strategy and messaging that they took with the American Rescue Plan, which also faced zero support from Republicans and a little bit of pushback from Democrats as well, like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who did not want to include such provisions like the minimum wage and eventually got their way. I think the administration is certainly clear-eyed about the fact that they're going to have to make some considerations and concessions to more moderate Democrats who might not be able to get behind such a huge spending spree. It's $4 trillion and broken up potentially into several different packages. But if the Biden administration wants to get this done through budget reconciliation, which it appears to be the way forward, that's what they're going to have to do. But again, you are seeing the White House far more concerned, I think, with appeasing appeasing Democrats rather than Republicans who have already drawn the red line against raising taxes and repealing the Trump's tax cuts, which is what this White House intends to do in order to pay for this package.
Russell, I also want to ask you about the Biden administration reportedly stepping up efforts to combat domestic extremism using tactics historically used against foreign terrorist groups. How might that work?
Well, this is something that has been discussed with a lot of attorneys generals. The need that looking at the fight against domestic terrorists has to include efforts that were gone to fight foreign terrorists right after September 11th. Attorney General Hector Valderas here in New Mexico has stressed this immediately. We need to look at the efforts to fight foreign terrorism like we did in September 11th. Looking at the banking structures, how they're organizing, how they're recruiting. So this is something that the administration has faced pressure for quite some time now. He met with some reporters, or his senior officials met with some reporters a few days ago to basically outline how they intend to do this. This is a long road. I mean, they're catching up with an administration that was resistant to reports that domestic terrorism were on the rise. And instead, the previous administration focused on Antifa and supposed leftist insurgents. But right now, the administration is playing catch up, but also trying to, and also facing pressure that police agencies across the country have to step up their hate crime reporting. Right now, as it stands, 88% of law enforcement agencies last year reported little or no hate crimes at all, didn't even bother reporting. So there's still a discrepancy of how bad the crime is. And a lot of people, especially in law enforcement and attorneys generals across the country, say the problem is much worse. So they have a lot of catching up to do. But right now, I don't think they're ready to unveil specific proposals yet.
And Jackie, the Biden administration is setting up talks next week, moving to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. These indirect talks are being described as a potential last chance to re-enter the deal that the Trump administration exited. So who is involved and how much is riding on these meetings?
Yeah, well, right now we're seeing the U.S. and other original signatories convening in Vienna this week in order to revive the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump withdrew from in 2018 as a part of the maximum pressure campaign that the Trump administration was conducting against Tehran. But the U.S. is in a tricky position. It's going to be a potentially long road back to getting into this deal. Representatives of Iran, France, Germany, Russia, Britain, and China are convening tomorrow in order to discuss the rolling back of sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. And U.S. envoys are actually not a part of those discussions. They're going to be on hand in the same area for separate contacts with the group, according to an EU statement. And State Department spokesman Ned Price has already said that he doesn't anticipate direct U.S.-Iran talks. There's already a non-starter that the U.S. has hit with Iran, and that is over concerns about Iran's enrichment of uranium that have gone up to 20% in recent months, far above the limit of the deal. The Biden team has called on Iran to reverse the uranium enrichment. Tehran calls this a non-starter. So the U.S. is in a tricky position in getting this jump-started and back into a place where a deal is salvageable even.
Meanwhile, Ed, we are seeing an interesting potential rift growing between the GOP and big businesses, which have traditionally been aligned more or less in the past. How are changes in voting rules changing the rules of engagement here?
Yeah, this is an interesting development and one that really kind of builds on increased corporate activism that we've seen over the past 4 to 5 years. Really since the start of the Trump administration, perhaps punctuated today by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's urging CEOs to, quote, stay out of politics when it comes to this debate over election laws in various states, plus forthcoming conversations about climate change and gun control. Unclear if that suggestion that they stay out of politics extends to them donating to political campaigns. But in this case, the Senate Minority Leader saying that they don't necessarily know what they're talking about and are being pressured to engage in this situation by Democrats, by liberal groups who are concerned and opposed by the law that was passed in Georgia and the others that are up for debate in places like Arizona and Texas. You've seen through the weekend pretty strong criticism of Major League Baseball's decision to move the All-Star game from Atlanta to somewhere else later this year in response to the Georgia voting law. You've seen senators like Marco Rubio, for example, suggest that the commissioner of MLB should give up his membership at the Augusta National Golf Club where the Masters is held if he's got a problem with Georgia hosting the All-Star game. Others questioning whether companies like Coca-Cola or Delta still do work with the Chinese and the communist government there that is suppressing Uyghurs if they've got issues with the Georgia voting law. It's going to be that kind of a conversation now going forward as they raise questions about this. And it comes as Republicans, many of them, are trying to recast the party as the party of working class Americans and an anti-corporate stance. Whether that actually ever happens to full effect remains to be seen. But for now, many Republicans believe they've got a chance to strike a more populist tone and call out what they call cancel culture or the wokeness of many corporations that they don't agree with.
Russell, I want to ask you as well. You have some reporting on how Democrats who lost their seats in Congress last November are launching a group to defend the moderates they see as being in danger. What are they planning and why?
Yeah, well, the group Third Way, it's an advocacy group that focuses on defending centrist Democrats, organized some Democrats who lost in 2020 in very close elections in swing districts. So former Congresswoman Xochitl Torres-Small, for example, out of New Mexico, and Joe Cunningham out of South Carolina are forming together saying, look, we need to defend Hispanic or Democratic moderates in 2022. And these seats will determine who controls Congress. And the reason why they're doing that, and they feel that they were victims of unfair attacks in their own races, that they were vulnerable to attacks that tried to portray them as supporters of the Green New Deal, as opposing fracking. And these moderate Democrats said that was far from the case. We actually are unorthodox compared to our parties. And so these Democrats are coming at it and saying that we got to defend these moderates because this will determine who will control Congress. In addition to that, there is an internal war going on with the Democratic Party between progressives and moderates, sometimes on racial lines. In New Mexico, for example, party officials recently selected a white woman to run for the seat of Interior Secretary Deb Haaland. She's the Democratic nominee. And they chose this woman over other Hispanic and Native American candidates in New Mexico. This is a state that is majority minority. They have long complained they've been marginalized in politics. And in New Mexico, for example, both state legislatures are controlled by white leaders. So in a place like New Mexico where people of color are the majority, they are getting some pushback in how the Democratic Party will be shaped in the future and how it will run candidates in 2022. So moderates are saying, look, we need to be on this page. A lot of Hispanics do vote moderate. And don't forget, in 2020, Trump did well among Hispanics, especially among low propensity Hispanic voters.
Right. The demographics certainly are changing in this country. And as you note, there is a lot of room here for both parties as they try to get people from all of those groups to vote for their candidates. All right. Ed O'Keefe, Jackie Alemany, and Russell Contreras, thank you all very much.